As a performer, your body is there.
Hi, I'm Mad Kate, and you're listening to Sweat, Sexuality, Work, Extraction, Art, Theatrics. Sweat is a series of conversations about performance and performativity of the sexual and sexualized body at work, where work is broadly defined as the labor of survival, the labor of care, creativity, and capital A art. How exactly do we define our work? And how does that work entangle and circumscribe our sexual identities, our creative lives, and the way in which we provide care? How do we perform tasks, acts of care, and identities? Anchored in our always already racialized and sexualized bodies, our complex intersectionalities, these conversations are a means of relating through work to each other. I hope they contribute to dialogues which normalize sex work as work, and all work is deserving of respect, healthy conditions, and a living wage.
The genocide has impacted me in very direct forms. My body became the eyes that cannot stop watching and seeing places that I have been to, being eradicated, and just the geography of the place where I know changing, and the people that comprise what was my homeland turning into Nazis, and it, at the end of the day, becoming a place that I can no longer go back to.
This month's conversation is with LIAD LAND. LIAD LAND is a musician, an artist, an activist, a perpetual migrant, a queer trash diva, a Jew from Palestine, and a master of the margins. Her music, performances, and films de-exotify and demystify positions of so-called sexual and political deviance. In them, the body and voice are used as tools of decolonial education and resistance, as platforms to display vulnerabilities, and as means to call for a revolution, celebrate life, and mourn.
I work with my body, I work with the naked body. This is how I present myself. I wear whatever it is that I'm going through on my body. This is a part of my art before it moved to a lyrical sense, before I started doing music.
LIAD's art and worldview is informed by decades of political work on intersectional issues such as sex worker rights and queer and Palestinian liberation. Her debut album, Nothing to Declare, and subsequent EP, Nothing to Remix, were released in 2024. Her current music and live show focuses on collective organizing and ongoing resistance with Palestine as a starting point. Broken is her upcoming single. When I go to get my, thank goodness I have it, free health care, and I see my orthopedist, and they basically treat me terribly because I've managed to injure my ankle or whatever it is, or I go to a doctor who treats me as though I'm stupid for not knowing the answers to their questions already about my heart or how it's functioning, or, you know, I could give so many examples of having encountered spaces that are providing me care but aren't providing me warmth. Or even communities where, yes, it is really amazing when we come together and put money towards something, but there's days and days and days go by where people, myself, many, many people I know, feel lonely, feel depressed, feel like they're waking up and don't really have real community.
So that second part is not new, but maybe we start with the first, because I see it as a bit different. I don't think that we can really ask, for instance, the healthcare system to provide us with emotional care. There is a level of responsibility that they have in how they deliver services that I feel that in Germany, because of German culture, because of what social relations is and how it is done with such a huge level of distance, alienation, which is only being further perpetuated by the formalities of, a doctor, patient, or a service giver and a receiver sort of a structure. But on top of that, of course, I just give an example. I went on the first full week of January, I went to 3 different doctors, and, one of them had literally started doing all sorts of tests on me because he didn't have time to go through the list of papers and see that these tests were already done. Another one, there was a reception desk where, I mean, they now, throughout the section in which they make new patients fill out all sorts of questionnaire because it takes too much time to go through it and to document it. So the person at the reception, who's also cannot schedule any appointments because that's now automated by a system, so they've also been demoted, asks the person very loudly while all the other patients in the other room can hear what kind of medication they are taking, information that should absolutely be confidential. But it's simply because the shrinking of the resources all the way around. And that's how it was for, I don't know, I went to a doctor because of an orthopedist, because of foot problems. And I said, well, can I do physiotherapy? Can you send me? He says, no, I can't. And I knew that would be the answer, that he doesn't want to send me to that. And I said, but I know that there are things that I can do rather than just wait and then have the situation get worse and eventually get surgery. And I said, yeah, there are. Google it. That was his answer. And again, when you see that as a collective, not as a single instance, you see how that system is shrinking. Nonetheless, when it comes to social alienation, I don't know, and loneliness, I don't know if this is getting worse. I don't have that. I definitely feel it. I also don't have solutions. This is something that for me has always existed in coming to Europe, in coming to I would say Central and Northern Europe. In the southern part of Europe, I feel it a lot less, and I see it much more closer to the Mediterranean culture where I come from, where even the person downstairs from you at the grocery store or at the corner shop knows you after a while, and the ability to get into normal chit-chat that gives you some of the warmth that you need, even with people standing in line, is normal. Wherein here, within German culture, it's considered a task. It's considered an expansion of energy that people simply don't have. And today, in the world in which, again, the salaries are getting less for what you have to give, people are looking for ways to cut, to invest less resources in every way that they can, and the way that it manifests oftentimes within the construct of German understanding of things is to give less emotionally, to cut down on interactions, to give less time to each person they come into contact with. And I can't stand for it, and it's so unlike what I need and what I'm used to still after 15 years of living in this country, that's part of the reason that I'm leaving. But the element of social alienation and loneliness is also connected to the cultures and what is expected, how easy or difficult it is to form a community. Since I've arrived in Berlin, I felt that there were many scenes that were very loosely and informally put together, but communities is something that has been much, much, much more difficult to compose. I also think that these things shrink as we get older for us to reach out and to make long-lasting, deeper connections with people that we can also then ask for something from. So this also plays a role.
Yeah, I mean, I think I hear you on the kind of the cultural German or Northern European cultural coldness. And I also think the problems also exist among, people that I consider to be part of my community. And this is not to call other people out, because I think I participate in it in the sense that I feel overworked, I feel burnt out, I feel like I can't show up in the way that I want to. Like, you're part of let's say a group to provide care after somebody's had surgery, and you're called upon to go and make dinner, and you go, oh my God, I'm fucking tired. I don't know if I can do this. Or I have been invited to a social situation, which I think would be good for me and warm, but I know that I'm going to have to spend 20 euros in order to buy a thing or to make a thing to contribute. And even that feels a lot. Yeah. Like, I've had that moment where I'm going, shit, like, I'm feeling really broke. Can I even afford that? Or do I have the time to make this dish? And that sounds so shit, like, when I hear myself say it, and yet it actually is real. Like, I somehow need the entrance point for community to be so much lower, and I think everybody does. Yeah. Like, I can show up and not talk to anybody because I just, like, I can't be social that day, and I can not bring something. But sure, you can maybe do that every once in a while. but maybe it needs to be more structurally formed, that like we can really have these kind of no effort gatherings or something.
Yeah, I have to say, just as an example, in the last 2 weeks, a bunch of people come and kind of gather people around, I don't know, a surgery, help that they need around a very particular cause. And by the way, it's not that I haven't done it myself, but as you say, looking at what I can give now at this moment, it pains me because I don't think that it's fair. I've asked that of people, and I'm at a moment that I cannot give. And at the same time, I see the people who are doing the asking are definitely ones that have an understanding that they can ask. It's not entitlement, but I mean, I see people who have a lot less and that could oftentimes rely on that, having a much harder time articulating it and asking for people that, because they, in a way, they don't see themselves as deserving of that from other people. They don't want to take these resources, whatever they are, even if they're just time, from other people. And so there's also something that is very class-based on that.
Yeah.
Not always, but it happens.
Yeah, that's true. I think class-based and access to certain kinds of languaging around this stuff.
First of all, you need to, in a way, understand your worth, and when you are, quote unquote, allowed to ask, and you need to know people that you can ask of. We've had an understanding. So, for instance, in Tel Aviv, historically, it's been a city for trans women, where they come together because other places in the country have been very rife with oppression. I think this has changed quite a bit in the last 15 years. And still, historically, trans women, definitely some of the most oppressed part of the population, that there's an understanding that they need to be there for each other, because other people will simply not, in ability to get jobs, in ability in facing both social and police violence, and in being thrown into jail historically. So they are the only ones who are there for one another, even when the law was not on their side. And at the same time, there's such a huge amount of fights, of violence within that community, because they take and internalize a lot of the hate that is put out on them at each other, because they cannot put it back out to the world. And so in these sort of situations, the systems that provide you with the care that you need, the only ones that can, it also comes with a price of communal internalized hatred.
Mm-hmm. Maybe this takes us to some of the advocacy work that you have done in the past, especially with migrant sex workers.
Sure.
I know that you said you haven't formally been doing sex work or much sex work in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
But I think when I first met you, you identified as a sex worker. I don't know if you still identify as a sex worker.
I don't think that I can have that taken away from me, because I've done it for such a long amount of time. It is an embedded part of who I am. And at the same time, there has been this distinction between present or active sex workers and other sex workers, where it is understood much that, that sex work is a component of our lives. If we are present, it shapes our lives. It shapes, where we get our money and what we do on a daily basis, where the ones who are not have that in their history and have that in a way that formed their understanding of the world, and definitely as knowledge, but not in their everyday, in their current everyday.
Yeah. I think that's a really important distinction.
But the language is being formed. I do feel that the more that there is a system of different communities, also in different places, has more of a voice, has more of an ability to articulate itself, both to the world and to each other, the more that this language gets formed. That's definitely, and it has changed quite a lot in, I would say, even the last 15 years. The more that, for instance, academics align themselves as allies and have worked on the behalf of sex workers in the work that they do, and also in advocacy, the way that in some places the academia enabled sex workers to, more often than not, anonymously become academics and activate a sex worker network as a part of the research or peer research, for instance, and through that also, move up the echelons of where they can make influence. And a part of that has also definitely been not just articulating our needs and visibilizing them to the tiny and sometimes it feels like ever shrinking public that wants to hear it, but at very least to ourselves, there's much more, again, not just a knowledge or recognition, but articulation of what we need within sex worker communities that I have seen. I was first introduced to this distinction between like an active or a present sex worker and others in the UK, in London. Wow, this must have been around 2018 or something like that, or maybe 2017. I went there to kind of look at all the different groups and organizations working with and for sometimes sex workers and by sex workers as well. This was during the time that the ProstSchG Gesetz, the law to save prostitutes, rather to protect the Prostitution Protection Act. That's what it was called. It passed in 2017. It started being implemented in different parts of Germany, if I'm not mistaken, in 2018, and it came to Berlin quite late. But it was clear that the project that I made, which was very fundamentally grounded in visiting brothels and doing skill sharing and empowerment workshops for very specifically migrant sex workers from the different places that they have migrated to in their languages. So this is going to have to change because the brothels were going to close and we would need to modify the form in which we were doing this project. So I went to the UK and I went to a sex worker brunch, which was done once a week. I have no idea if it is still done in London. And that's where I heard this distinction. And it was explained to me why it's important. Because, of course, there is an understanding that people who are in sex work, oftentimes, not always, face a very particular set of circumstances, oftentimes are very precarious, and this is why they are currently engaging in sex work. And so, again, what they're going through and what their needs are very specific as compared to other people who have done it and have had a bit of time to move away from that and to, restructure their lives also.
Well, maybe this will link. What I wanted to actually maybe have you say is some of the things that were passed at that time. For example, like I'm assuming brothels were closing because some would have to register or follow certain guidelines, that the ProstSchG made things suddenly more difficult for them to stick around. Also, I think another distinction that comes up with active sex work is whether or not you get registered and decide to, or whether it's only one thing you do, so you maybe decide not to register as a sex worker, which is something that came through with this.
ProstSchG Gesetz. So maybe I go back and explain to you how I even got into this and what this project is about. I moved here in 2010 and I was like, I'm tired of activism. I want to do art. I want to do performance art. I secretly wanted to do music, but it took me forever to even say that. At the same time, I didn't know how to not do political work. And sex work was such an embedded part of my life that as soon as I moved here, first of all, I had to immediately go back to sex work because I didn't have the language skills to do some of the things that I was doing in Palestine for money, which was, among others, journalism. And I sought out the services of Hydra, which is an organization here and a counseling center. And that's most of the services that it provided at the time to help sex workers out in all sorts of moments of need. And I understood, unfortunately, that when it comes to actual advocacy work, it took me a while to understand that, but advocacy work, political work on the behalf of sex workers in this country is not something that I can do because I do not possess enough correct German skills and very high German skills to do it on social media, meet politicians, etc., that are absolutely unwilling to do it, just have it spoon-fed to them in a language and a form that they can digest, that is easy for them, and also they don't want to. So, but for me, at the time, a non-German speaker, and eventually, I never would I be a mother tongue, a German speaker, that is simply inaccessible to me. That is still the situation today. People who are most in need of the reform of the laws or the absolute overhaul of the legal changes on their behalf are the last people that are doing political work and advocacy work for sex workers in the places where it matters in this country, because they have no access to it, unfortunately. So I went into the area of what is called community building and support and empowerment and peer education at the end of the day. It was very clear to me that, like me, there were many people who migrated here for work in the sex industry, and unlike me, they have far less networks and knowledge of what exists here, and oftentimes much more fear and mistrust of organizations that are official, that could be linked to the state. And that is part of what is also that, and the language is what's keeping them from reaching out for support. So we built a peer education project that I co-initiated that eventually expanded to the languages that are spoken here by sex workers, specifically Bulgarian, Romanian, Thai, Polish, even though Polish was less necessary because most people who came here from Poland already knew German and are more established here, and also Russian. I hope I'm not missing anybody. Also in Spanish. And also English, and we would go out to brothels with the migrant sex workers themselves, and where they can speak to their peers and offer them information, also see what's happening in the brothel, and based on what they see, do a skill sharing workshop based on what is needed that eventually would enable people to either seek the services that they need or simply work in conditions that would enable them to know their rights and to get better paid for the services that they provide. So that was the goal, and it was done. It was designated to be done in brothels. And at the time, from 2010, there were around 600 brothels in Berlin, aside from other street-based places that sex workers would work in, which we also did workshops in. So, and at the time, there was a law to legalize prostitution, but at the end of the day, that law was never fully implemented. And in 2000, after a long lobbying process by SWERF, so anti-sex work, sex work exclusionary feminists, to the SPD party, SPD came into power and in fact implemented this law that masquerades itself as a protection of sex workers, where what it does is force registration of sex workers. The way that it was presented to the public is that when there is a registration office where all sex workers would need to come and register and get an ID for their work, then the state could basically, and its workers can basically check out if the person is being exploited or is being trafficked and prevent that from happening, where everybody from the get-go knew that it was absolutely bullshit, that there was no such way to prevent that, because everybody who is actually working in whatever exploitation or bad conditions, and certainly also being trafficked, would never set foot in a government-based office, and so they would just be pushed much more into the sidelines, and it would be difficult for even official state or state-funded sex worker organizations like Hydra that know what they're doing, that know sex workers, to reach the people who are absolutely the most marginalized, where also what it does is creates a database, a state-run database of information of sex workers, which is never safe. Of course, the biggest opposers to that were migrants, who simply do not have every reason in the world to not trust the state with all their information and their name and picture in it that says that they are sex workers. So these would be, of course, the last people to register and to register themselves. And it was known that a huge percentage of people would not register. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. And of and a part of it is also is having IDs, which you need to carry with you when you are working. Also something that makes us extremely unsafe should it fall into the hands of anybody but us. So people simply refuse that. But this was the conditions in which to work in any place that registered itself as a business, whether a brothel or an escort service. So the first thing that happened is that brothels disappeared because they couldn't find enough people who are registered to work in that. And if they ever faced a raid by the state, the fines they would have to pay immediately would just force them to close. So they started disappearing, and then sex workers simply started going underground, which means working online, working off the grid, working in places where, again, for anybody else, it would be more difficult to find them, certainly more difficult to form a community or a network of exchange of care, So it's not just that the state can't reach them, they also cannot reach other sex workers. So all the places in which information is being shared, necessary, life-saving information, I don't know, what you should watch out for from the state, from arrests, from cops, from potentially dangerous clients, from, which business owners are good and which ones are exploitative. These things were much more difficult to transmit among each other as a result of this law. And what we did at Hydra, I consequentially decided amongst with my colleagues, is that we are just going to open a center so people come to us to receive the information and to get workshops, and also not just it doesn't need to be formalized. It could just be a place to hang out, to do your laundry, to rest, to get food. So we did that. It came with a huge amount of outreach that we needed to do because, again, people don't know about it. And I think the people who reach out to things that are, let's say, workshops, so skills, are definitely the ones who are more privileged sex workers and can see the direct benefit from that, where other people don't know about it or don't think in terms of, professionalizing their services in that way, so that the services that they need or the place that they need is much more informal and accessible. So we transformed that into the Hydra Café. And also at the time, there was an understanding by the state that they knew it in advance, that it would marginalize a lot of sex workers and push them into the margins of society. And what does the state, the Berlin Senate, I should say that's not the state on a federal level, what do? Just throw a bunch of money so that there's more social workers. We gave the money that the state gave us to sex workers or people with sex work experience, so they could be doing the outreach and the work in the Hydra Café. So that is the work. That is more or less the work that I have done while I was there. I was there for 5 years, and I left this project in 2022. So it's already been a while as well.
Thanks for giving that expansive. Appreciate it. And I think it's really important for people to hear, always, to really understand what are the issues most important for sex workers. What do you feel like are sex workers' superpowers? I really like to ask this question because I feel like we need to move beyond just, hey, doing sex work is also work and sex work is okay, but into, well, what are all the special, amazing things that sex workers know about?
Maybe I go one step back, okay?
Yeah,
because
please.
I think that people who have no knowledge of sex work at all or are just caught by social discourse, oftentimes unknowingly, think about exploitation, yes. Think about, forced labor, think about trafficking, and think of violence when they think of sex work. Again, because I don't work in an institution where I see the statistics, I cannot say how things are now, but I can say that as of 4 years ago, there's much more trafficking for construction work, a lot more, and for cleaning jobs than there ever was for sex work. Germany has this reputation after the legalization of sex work of being Europe's brothel, etc. That just hasn't proven itself ever. Like, trafficking is something that comes with very legal definitions of what it is, that we don't see that here. We see that, but in very, very tiny cases, in a way that does not justify the stigma against sex work and the persecution at the end of the day of sex work and sex workers. Of course, it is exploitative. Of course, it is often underpaid, like any sort of informal sector. There's a lot of room for any sort of exploitation to take place. And essentially, the work that I have done in terms of peer work is to empower people to understand, to protect themselves from that, to understand their worth, and to prevent, to the best of our ability, to keep exploitation from happening within the confines of capitalism. So again, we are all exploited. I'm very sorry. All of us, no matter what kind of work that we are doing, but there's nothing innate to sex work that is exploitative, except for patriarchy, except for capitalism, except for sex worker stigma. Those are the things that cause harm to sex work, not the work itself. And so that needs to be said. And back to your question. On one hand, sex work is unskilled work in the sense that it enables almost anybody who want to do it, and then find out if it's right for them or not. So the entry-level conditions are very basic. However, you quickly develop skills that enable you to stay with it, or you leave, or you realize it's not for you, and then, hopefully you leave. And those skills that people very quickly develop or kind of pull out of their bag of tricks that they have are enormous, and I don't think that I can have it all. Time management, very important. I don't know. I started having a clock in my head of how long is half an hour and how long is an hour without necessarily having a watch to look at, because you cannot give clients extra time. Multitasking is super important. You always have to have your eyes and your feet and your legs on a bazillion other things. Where's the door? Where is the time? Again, what else I'm doing after this? What am I doing before? Did anybody see me come into this place? If I walked into a hotel, in a way that could give away that I'm a sex worker, or if I'm going on public transportation to a date, I need to be super aware. So there's another thing. We have very heightened senses of our environment. And of course, there is development of interpersonal skills, sensual skills, emotional skills that we either have or we develop, because this is a huge part of our work. And it's also maybe a part of the work that we're being paid for, but is completely underappreciated by society. People need that. Men, like cis men in society, do not have a way of asking for emotional support, for care, for touch, for intimacy outside of sexuality. So they ask for it oftentimes in the form of sexual services, and that's it. But at the end of the day, what they're getting oftentimes is a lot more. What they want is a lot more. And it is up to us not only to provide that, but to see when that need arises, and those are things that are not seen. I don't know if it's superpower. I think that our ability to survive and to persevere under extreme levels of not just stigma, but persecution by society against adversity. Think of how many sex workers are migrant, or maybe for people who don't know, it's the majority of people in the world. A huge percentage are also mothers, so they are taking care financially of not just children, but also oftentimes their family. Sex work is a means for you to support a gender transition, oftentimes in situations in which, either in the society that you live in or in the society where you came from, such a transition is not socially accepted, and then you would be barred from having other jobs, for instance. So there is like a multitude of repressions that we have to persevere, and at the same time, we have to do the advocacy work for ourselves, so nobody can do it. We are on top of that, are facing a situation where we cannot out ourselves because what we are doing is not socially acceptable. So people still need to politically advocate for themselves and to fight, while oftentimes seeing how to do that anonymously. So that is a lot. And I think that, I don't know if it's superpowers, but it just needs to be acknowledged,
Yeah.
I've seen people come out of of sex work being great performers and great actors and actresses, again, very eloquent in fighting, not just for sex workers' rights, but for others, and definitely having an understanding of oppression, intersectional forms of oppression that then they take to do political work for other adjacent, I would say, marginalized groups. It's not always the case, but I see it a lot.
Beautiful. I also think about how many different kinds of bodies sex workers see, different kinds of kinks and sexual desires they see and welcome and kind of play with. And I find that also really queer, actually.
Yeah.
Even when, doing sex work with people who might not consider themselves queer per se, but that queerness of learning a lot of different ways that people like to have sex.
Sure. I'm going to, again, to frame it a bit. I'm sorry if in more realistic, possibly Marxist terms.
Do it.
No, but the thing that I'm apologizing for is that this is out of the realms of acceptance and pleasure. Because, of course, we get exposed to a huge amount of bodies and desires. It's true. Some people come with their built-in prejudices that the world gives them towards them and they reject them, and other
you mean
people,
clients, or you mean
sex workers, this person is ugly, this person, the things that they're asking for is too weird, and I don't know what to do that, I don't provide that, or I can't, or I shouldn't.
Sure.
Most people, hopefully, when they see that, they understand that it is something that they can capitalize on, and then, oh, you want this or this or this thing? Well, this is what's called an extra. This is called an extra service that we are providing for you, but then we're going to charge more money. And since I can cater to this particular thing that you want, and not everybody can and understand and figure it out, or I'm a specialist in that, I can market myself and I can sell my services for more money. And I mean, maybe that sounds evil, but we live in a world where everything is commodified. And so sex workers, in order to persevere, have to also have an understanding of how to do that within the framework of their work, just to avoid being exploited.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Just so long as, I suppose, I don't know. This is just like very off the cuff. I'm just thinking about, as long as it's not a kind of tax on,
like on themselves, on what they are giving.
No, just on bodies being different. That kind of thing. Just on.
Of course it is. I mean, of course it is. Of course it is. But society is a tax on all of those things. Sex work just mirrors that, right? Sure. The people that I see that, let's say, advertise working with all sorts of disabled bodies want to do that and can do that. The people who do all sorts of special fetishes or work with differently gendered people or do BDSM services or do things, generally do that in their personal life, so they like it. Again, I have a hard time framing pleasure within the frame of work, because it's not realistic. I mean, I'm not saying that people don't enjoy it. I think that they do. I think in some cases it is also, the work itself is empowering, definitely empowering to, like I found it empowering to my sexuality and my understanding of my body, but more to the power that I have over cis men, much more than pleasure. And where I can use it also in my other life. But so there's definitely a correlation, but I kind of want to remove the fact that, if you're not enjoying your work, then you are exploited. Which one of us, in order to frame sex work as work, you have to understand that a huge part of what most people in the world are doing, they're doing it for money, they're not doing it for joy, and everything that we do involves, in no matter what kind of work or profession that we are working in involves doing things that we don't like.
Yes, no, I absolutely agree.
Or things that are not pleasurable, that we are okay with, or that we chose to do, but it's not everything could be I'm coming with every client that that's not how it works.
No, definitely not. Maybe this moves into a bit more of the somatic or physical questions I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask you, because you have experience as a sex worker and you have a lot of experience as a performer and maybe doing explicit things, depending how we define that, in a performance space, or at least I've seen, you presenting the explicit body, the nude body, which sometimes people might frame as sexualized. It may or may not be that way for yourself. How do those two roles feel different? If they do, how do they dialogue with each other? How does it feel like to be inside your body when you're doing those different kinds of things?
It's super different. I mean, I would say the sex work that I have done when I started doing sex work was in dancing in a peep show, a form of sex work that no longer exists in the world. And I was naked the entire time on stage with heels and oftentimes with other women. And this gave me, a knowledge of my body and a knowledge of what I can do with my body. And it became kind of, I don't know, one of my signature moves that I do. I work with my body. I work with the naked body. This is how I present myself. I wear whatever it is that I'm going through on my body. This is a part of my art before it moved to a lyrical sense, I would say, before I started doing music. However...
Sorry, can I cut? I want to know what you mean there. Like when you say you wear whatever you're going through on your body, like, can you describe that for the listener a little more?
Yeah. So oftentimes I am naked, and a part of that is that confrontation. I don't know, whether it's drawing or writing on my body. I've done things quite often that I also take things out of my pussy, when I speak about them or the things that they represent. Again, because I'm from Palestine, oftentimes it has to do with that, has to do with military occupation, has to do with war, and has to do how it affects us in a multitude of ways, like what we give to our children, how our wombs are being used as Jews in that part of the world, as cannon fodder, basically, for the war on Palestine. These are just examples, but maybe as a part of that, there is this element that I have, if you look back in what I do, of a level of directness and honesty with my body as a tool that is not sexual at all. It is, I would say, even humble and at the same time confrontational, where I show, I don't know, whether it's using video or again, or in my lyrics, that this is what the body is undergoing in, the particular material condition that either I am living in, or let's say in the last 2.5 years of being highly affected by genocide and being influenced by that. So, I don't know. Currently, in my show, I don't have anything like fancy. I mean, I'm naked. I don't have anything that's but I don't want people to necessarily focus on my genitals, so they're covered, but like in skin-colored clothes. And then I have a big broken heart, but it's red, and it's broken in a way that the bottom part is just a red triangle, which is also illegal in this country. And I, for instance, have faced a lot of physical problems. I think we all have faced. Anybody who has been deeply indirectly affected by genocide have faced all sorts of problems. And a new performance of mine, What Will Become of Our Bodies, actually deals with that and kind of, discusses it, very directly discusses it. One of the things that I have faced is heart problems. So I have these stickers from heart monitors with strings that are, look like blood in a way, or resemble it in a way of like, strings of blood coming out of them. So this is just an example, but it is not, again, what I've taken initially out of sex work and think that it has been a long time ago is my knowledge of my body and my ability to work with it. But at the end of the day, it will not contain sexuality unless I find it necessary for whatever it is that I'm presenting. And oftentimes it just feels that the performances, especially, are just a very, very intimate and candid conversation with the audience. And in that, sexuality would be a mask would be a disturbance in a way, at least to what I'm trying to do. So, and I've seen people, so when I did Pussy, for instance, which is a show that I've done in different European countries, but I also did it in Palestine, people see a naked woman on stage and they're like, woo, porn, great. And within 10 minutes, it's silent. I remember when I did it in Haifa, in Palestine, I was working with just male technicians, and I was like, listen, we don't have a time to do a run through, but I'm going to be naked. I'm going to be taking things out of my pussy. So I'm telling you this now, so you're not surprised, and you're just going to have to deal with it. And one of the people were like, oh, blah, blah, my girlfriend also does porn. Great. I don't care. We're going to do a show. And by the end of it, all of the technician and also the audience just came to me very silent and crying and thanking me, also because of, again, the way that I, as a Jewish person, could reflect and discuss the way that my body, as a Jewish person, deals with the effect of the multitude of ways of Palestinian repression, the ways that it affects Israeli Jewish voices of dissent, etc. And they were super humbled by it. It was the opposite of being, excited or sexually excited completely. So there's a lot of things that we can do with our body, right? It's not just sexuality.
Yeah, beautiful. It makes me really wish to have seen this and be part of that moment.
Exactly. It's online, but you know how it is. Live performances is one thing, and seeing it on video is something else. You ask me maybe what I'm doing now?
Yeah, please. Yeah, tell me about your latest work.
So as I said again and again, the genocide has impacted me in very severe forms, in very direct forms. I mean, my body became just, the eyes that could not stop watching the genocide, but also understanding and seeing places that I have been to being eradicated, and just the geography of the place where I know changing, and the people that comprise what was my homeland turning into Nazis, and it, at the end of the day, becoming a place that I can no longer go back to at all. And in the process also having an understanding of that, and having an understanding that I need to remove myself from the state. Not only can I not go back there, my grandmother's house was bombed at a certain moment, so it also doesn't exist. So some of my childhood memories have been gone. And I'm not saying this for pity. I'm just saying this for context. I'm not a Palestinian. I'm not the one who is being, there's an attempt of annihilation towards me. But I cannot be a part of that at all. And the way for me, the inevitable act that I needed to do is to give up my Israeli citizenship and encourage other people who are Jewish to do that. And this is the process. This is sort of like the scenery in which I have done music and art in the last 2 years. I mean, first it started with, I cannot just do shows in singing about anything other than what is, Palestine liberation, and what is happening to Palestinians, and how are we dealing with it. And a lot of it has also been a process of reflection from Europe, from my perspective towards that. So I wrote a bunch of songs, and they have been incorporated into my live shows. Again, a lot of them are of the experience of watching a genocide from the comfort of Europe, and understanding and just expressing the loss. There is still a loss, and a loss of a homeland, a loss of my people, and seeing them turn into Nazis. And in what I'm also seeing around other, I don't know if they're called ex-Israeli or just Jews from Palestine who have migrated, in trying to sort of like sift through a process of what it is that we give up on, very explicitly, and remove ourselves from very outspokenly, and other things that are an embedded part of us, our language, our culture, that we want to keep while we are abroad. And, and kind of discussing that through my my music. And I'm releasing a new song, which I wrote maybe, 9 months into the genocide, called Broken, with a music video of that. And maybe also I'm doing several performances, which are also sort of like they are short, and I would use them as intervals in my live show of music, in describing the different elements. I mean, they're sort of like written as diary entries throughout the genocide, but kind of describing the way that watching the genocide and its impact affects flirting, relationship, the body, our ability to generate support in community, etc. So that is one. One of them I also did as a film, and it's called The Disappearance of Pita. The bread, yes, the disappearance of Pita, because there was a time that it disappeared from the shops in Berlin. And pita, also known in Palestine and Egypt as khubz, comes from that part of the world. It is something that is very specifically eaten by Palestinians and Jews in Palestine and Egyptians and nowhere else. And there was a time in which it disappeared from the shops here, and it definitely has to do with genocide. So I talk about that. And one of them will be premiering in the Amsterdam Porn Film Festival at the end of February, the end of this month, and it's called What Will Become of Our Bodies. So very specifically dealing with the effects of genocide on the people around me, also many Palestinians, of course.
That's amazing. It's really, really inspiring to hear all of this. And I would love to hear and to experience the work more around how genocide is affecting these things you mentioned, like flirting, social spaces, all of this. I have my own experience of that, and I would be really curious to hear more about that from you too.
I mean, I have an entire. First of all, maybe just briefly, because this is not a part of my work. It's a part of the life of every Jewish person, definitely Israelis or ex-Israelis. No, Israelis who are living still in Palestine, but Jews that are are part of the dissent, that are anti-Zionist. All of us had lost family members and lost friends, not that in the sense that they are dead, but we became dead to them. Many of our friendships and relationships, either people left us behind, or we decided that we can no longer be in contact with these people because what they are actively contributing to, that we cannot support. And that has changed us. And definitely it affects dating. In my case, it also affected an important, intimate relationship. So
it's so huge. It's really huge. Yeah. I just had one technical question, which is, did you revoke your Israeli passport?
It's a long and bureaucratic process. And I started it several months ago. It hasn't come to completion. I'm hoping that it will be done in 2 months. I'm not going to elaborate on the process because it's boring, but in the process of doing it and speaking about it publicly, I realized that how important it is. And also, while this is not a deciding voice, definitely Palestinians, but also many other Arabs completely see me differently once they have a huge amount of respect for that, because for them, it is in a way a decision on my side to demote the privileges that I have. And again, for me, it's a way of just saying, I am no longer a part of the state in any way. So what is done there is no way that I am a part of in any way. So bye. And, it's a very defiant state, but I completely accept their perspective on it. The other thing that I've realized is that a lot of people, I'm the first person that they've heard that does it or that has done it, and it's not the truth. We are a group. There is several of us, and definitely it has grown during the time of genocide. And as I started it, I got to know more and more people who are interested and people who are already going through the process. And I put myself out there to them, not, first of all, to provide support, to help them to know about the process and to share the support that they need in order to make sure that they can do it. Also, the ones who are just thinking about it, what it actually entails, and also the actual rights that it takes away from us, very explicitly, the potentiality in which we will never be able to go back there. We would simply not be allowed. And at the same time, also working towards a joint declaration of all of us to publicize it as an act. I mean, it's a symbolic act, and it's also something that could only be done once. But I think that it's important to visibilize it, not just to the world, but specifically to other Israelis or ex-Israelis. Say, you can do it too. You can remove yourself from Zionism. You can cut from it. It's a very concrete act that you can do. There are ways to live in the world as a Jew outside and away from Zionism, and to divest in Zionism very directly. And I think that it's very important that we do it.
You just heard from musician, artist, and activist LIAD LAND. You can read more about her in the show notes. And just after this, you'll hear her new track, Broken. I'm Mad Kate, and you've been listening to Sweat, Sexuality, Work, Extraction, Art, Theatrics. Sweat is a series of conversations about performance and performativity of the sexual and sexualized body in work. The theme music was composed by me and features the voice of performer and actress Lori Baldwin. Sweat airs first every second Tuesday of the month at 13 hours Central European Time on Collaboratio. Afterwards, it's available for streaming wherever you get your podcasts. Sweat is entirely a labor of love. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting the show through my Patreon page. That's at patreon.com/Sweat Podcast. Thanks so much. Until next time.
I write this so I can remember what brings me joy, what instills life in me. Months of genocide made me forget what it feels to feel. Endless horizon of the Mediterranean, salty warm water on my skin. Guitar tremolo of an old soul song that I no longer hear. Meeting old friends, you don't got nothing to explain to you. Go through unbearable shit, they understand you. I like making new memories that I'll be able to revisit. A war leaves behind a silent vacuum, an erasure of a future. People continue not knowing what's out there to look forward to. We're all broken is my only answer to the question of how you're doing these days. No one can imagine a future beyond this. All that's left for us is continue to fight for a free Palestine.